Grüß, willkommen in einem video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 9 of my Star Trek, the original series, timeline analysis series of videos. In this video, I'll be discussing the exploration and colonization of the Sol system. I need to make it fairly clear that the timeline of the Star Trek, the original series, universe is not our own timeline, assuming you haven't worked this out by now. Some pivotal event occurred in 1968 or 1969 which caused the timelines to diverge, which I have discussed in my previous video. One effect of this change is the different focus on space travel. In the Star Trek, the original series timeline, space exploration and colonization occurs far earlier than it does in our own timeline. The two global conflicts and the appearance of the Vulcans are almost certainly the cause of this. We do not get many mentions of the moons and planets in our solar system in the series, so we do need to do a lot of gap filling in our analysis of the original series timeline. For example, the only mention of the moon is in the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday and the episode Return to Tomorrow. In both cases, it's only in reference to the first landing on the moon. When we move to Mars, there's only one mention of Mars in Return to Tomorrow, which was a comment about going to Mars, which I have to assume is exploration and eventual colonization of the planet. Now, I must point out, when I say Mars, I mean the planet Mars. We do get two comments about Martian colonies, of which there must have been at least three. However, these are most likely colonies established by Mars, which means Mars must have sent out colonists when it was just called Mars and not part of any unified alliance. There seems to be also three Martian colonies. While I have to admit it's possible that this could refer to three separate colonies on the planet Mars, nowhere else does Star Trek break up colonies on a single planet in this manner. So on balance, this likely means colonies established by Mars on new planets. They could be all in the same system, but most likely are on three separate planets. Venus is only mentioned once, but it's not the actual planet. Instead, it's a drug called the Venus drug. This could mean the drug is named after the goddess Venus, or it could mean it came from the planet Venus. I suspect the former, which means Venus was never terraformed in the original series timeline. Strangely enough, Jupiter is never mentioned in the original series Star Trek script. However, we can assume exploration and colonization or exploitation of its moons occurred in the same manner as what probably occurred with Saturn, where we get a little bit more references, or more references. Saturn is only mentioned once in the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday. In this reference, a Earth-Saturn manned mission is discussed. I'm assuming this occurred in 2009 using a DY-300 or DY-400 class spacecraft. It could have occurred earlier with some primitive or other missions, but the big mission that was mentioned in the episode did occur in 2009, and my guess is it's using a more advanced DY spacecraft to get there. There is no mention of Neptune or Uranus, and Pluto is only mentioned as the Enterprise goes past it in one episode. There is no mention of the asteroid belt in our solar system in the scripts. However, we do know from the episode Operation Annihilate that the Federation does mine asteroid belts and has bases on asteroids as a result. You would assume something similar would occur in the Sol system as well. The wild card is the series does often call planets asteroids, or what really is a planet an asteroid, so perhaps the asteroids being mined are standard planets. However, we do get one reference where they actually talk about an asteroid belt. The series does nonetheless get planets and asteroids mixed up a bit, so you need to be a bit careful. That represents all the references. Now we have to try and understand how we expanded and colonized the Sol system. In order to understand how the Earth explored and colonized the Sol system, we need to take this minimal information and use related events to construct a possible coherent history and theory. As Sherlock Holmes used to say, any theory which fits all known facts can be correct. Thus, we should start with the simplest theory first. Strangely enough, the most significant fact we have is the existence of Martian colonies, at least three. These are not colonies on Mars, they are colonies founded by Mars, on balance. This means Mars must have had a fully functional must have been a fully functioning independent nation with the ability to send colonists to another star system. Our history of the Sol system has to ensure Mars is able to achieve this. The earliest possible date for the exploration of Mars is probably late 1970s. If the Apollo mission landed on the Moon in 1969 and then sent a succession of follow-on missions during the decade to found a moon base, the next challenge would have been a mission to Mars. In our own timeline, manned primitive spacecraft could have started going to Mars in 1979 with a similar profile to the Moon missions, setting up a base in the late 1980s. So this could have occurred in the original series timeline and probably even could have occurred a little bit earlier. This may have allowed the US to set up a small base on Mars before World War III in 1986. World War III would have caused a halt to this plan, but we know the US developed and built the DY-100 during and shortly after World War III, so the delay may not have been that significant. Perhaps there was a ferocious space race with the USSR still occurring in this timeline, which means maybe there was a Soviet version of the DY-100 spacecraft. However, there is no mention of any such spacecraft and no evidence of it in the script, but it's an interesting theory. The key to colonising Mars is or was the development and construction of the DY-100 interplanetary spacecraft in the early 1990s. I would suggest 1992 or 1994 to allow Khan to modify a DY-100 spacecraft and escape in 1996. Mars must be colonised, developed, independent, and able to send colonists to other systems by some date shortly after Khan's mission. 1996 or 2000. Thus, the colonisation, development and independence of Mars must have occurred between 1992 and 2049. If the US built a number of DY-100 spacecraft between 1992 and 2000, they could have been able to transport a significant amount of colonists to Mars. Khan's ship could carry 84 people in sleeper pods. With no sleeper pods on board, up to 200 passengers may have been carried. The spacecraft must have been able to travel quickly, so an Earth-Mars round trip of 3 to 6 months would be possible. This would allow one ship to transport 400 to 800 colonists per year to Mars. A fleet of 10 DY-100 spacecraft could have allowed a colony of up to 15,000 to be established by the year 2000. This is a bit of a stretch, but it is technically possible. By 2018, the population of Mars could have been as great as 200,000, assuming additional DY-100 spacecraft are built, and even assuming if no improved or larger spacecraft are built as well. Based on the episode Space Seed, we know that there was a DY-500 spaceship, which was a ship that probably possessed some form of FTL drive and was used for interstellar travel. This is why Kirk thought Khan's ship was a DY-500. If correct, the development of the DY-200 to DY-400 occurred before 2018, which means the newest ships could have had a much larger capacity. If correct, a population of 500,000 on Mars in 2018 is not impossible. We know from the episode The Space Seed, the development of the DY-500 spacecraft in 2018 provided or possessed some form of primitive FTL capability. I would suggest an early form of impulse drive was developed by 2018 and used in the DY-500 spacecraft. The Earth had sent a FTL probe out unmanned in 2002. It's likely that observing the Vulcan FTL impulse drive gave the Earth the incentive to develop their own version of it. I doubt the Vulcans gave Earth this technology, as they did. And if they did, why was there such a large gap between the FTL probe in 2002 and an FTL manned spacecraft in probably 2018? The Earth must have been working on it. I strongly suspect the Earth had sent early spacecraft to Alpha Centauri before 2018. It's likely Earth had developed a drive giving them the ability to travel at a relativistic speed, which allowed them to reach Alpha Centauri in, let's say, 8 to 16 years. In Space Seed, one of the Enterprise's crew, Marla, indicated it took years to travel between planets, which would have meant systems before 2018. Once the DY-500 was developed, which was FTL capable, this time was slashed. With FTL Drive available in 2018, the Earth could now focus on developing colonies on Alpha Centauri rather than developing colonies on Mars, or developing Mars as a colony. This may have resulted in Mars taking a back seat, as there was a better location for colonists to go to. Now let's look at the other end of our timeline and work our way back. Mars had to be able to create colonies before 2049. If they had a number of DY500 spacecraft, they could have sent ships out in 2039 to found their 3 colonies. I have no ideas where these colonies were. It could have been Alpha Centauri or some other system. If Alpha Centauri, they could have easily been able to establish 3 colonies. If further out, the colonies could have been established, but they would have been significantly smaller. We know early Federation colonies consisted of about 100 to 200 colonists, plus equipment. A single DY500 could accommodate this. A single DY500 could travel to a system 10 light years away 3 times to found a colony within a 10-year time frame. That is, to found 3 colonies within that 10-year time frame. So it is technically possible. Of course, the next question to answer is, why would Mars be sending out colonists? It does not seem logical, unless they were annoyed about not being the number 1 colony anymore and wanted to regain their previous glory by founding their own new colonies. This may have also been a critical driver behind their independence. A population of well over 1 million in 2039 is viable, so Mars was no longer just a backwater and must have possessed some real form of real economic power. I suspect it was a logical base for any asteroid mining and grew wealthy on that trade. Now we come to the potential elephant in the room. This timeline is only required if Mars was annoyed and taking second fiddle to Alpha Centauri, became independent and founded colonies itself. If Mars never became independent, then the Martian colonies could refer to different colonies on the planet Mars. Although it's the only time the original series script calls different locations on the same planet different colonies, so it's unlikely. I personally like the Mars becoming independent theory, and I actually believe this is the correct the original series timeline on balance. But it is only slightly the higher probability theory. One interesting point that I thought about is Mars may well be the first and last attempt by the Terrans, or people from Earth, to terraform a planet. When the colonisation of Mars first occurred in the 1980s, it was the best candidate as a second home for humanity. By 2018, that was no longer the case, as FTL Drive now opened up a host of livable planets which could be reached in a reasonable time frame. Mars was no longer so important to Earth, and while I have no doubt the Martians continued their terraforming efforts, this could have been the last planet such an effort would have been made for such an inhospitable planet. Obviously, if they found planets out there that were only just slightly off, they would have made some efforts to terraform, but they probably would have bypassed any planet that looked like Mars. Now we come to Colonel Green's war. Colonel Philip Green led a genocidal war in the 21st century. This war occurred sometime between 2000 and 2033, so I have guessed 2000. It could have occurred later than 2000, but either way it lasted for about 1 year. A world war with all of Earth makes no sense. Colonel Green's country would have been reasonably small compared with a united NATO-Warsaw Pact conglomeration. This would be like Luxembourg invading Germany, so it's not possible. Regardless, the scripts say that there were no more global wars after the eugenics war, so we know it's not a global war. As a result, this could not be, or was not a world war, was most likely a small country on Earth engaging in a war with another small country on Earth. Green was probably looking for more glory to shore up his support in his own country, perhaps. Some theories suggest he wanted to euthanize mutated people, which had grown in number after World War III, and also the eugenics war. This could be possible, but I'll just simply stay with my simple theory and let others fill out the additional details that I basically have no evidence to support or refute. Any war would have needed to be short, sharp, and involved minimal infrastructure damage. I would suggest the result would have been the formation of the United Earth Territory, involving all countries on Earth. The other events occurring in the Solar System is not as important, but it's very logical to assume a reasonably large moon base would exist by 2050. It would have been a good staging point for the Mars colonisation and building of the DY class of spacecraft. I also suspect a lot of mining would have been occurring in the asteroid belts, using Mars as a supply depot and also giving Earth a good solid reason to colonise Mars. This would have been rather extensive by 2050. We do know the US completed the Earth-Saturn probe using possibly a DY-300 or DY-400 class spaceship in 2009. Any manned mission to Jupiter would have occurred earlier, perhaps 2007. This could have used a DY-200 spacecraft, for example. By 2050, I strongly suspect most of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn would have had bases, research bases and mining bases for the most part. I don't think people would want to live in such locations when it was possible to go to pristine planets in another system, so the populations of these bases would have been comparatively small. By 2050, the main focus was on exploring other systems. The Solar System was probably fully explored and was being extensively developed. Because there were many pristine worlds in other systems, there would have been few, if any, space habitats in the Solar System. Why bother building a megastructure when you can have a nice planet at significantly lesser cost? The other key event would have been the formation of the multi-planet United Earth territory, which now included Earth and Mars. Possibly Colonel Green was the catalyst for this, or possibly Earth decided it was best if all human colonies in space had some level of supervision by a common political entity. So whenever this occurred would have been the end of the Mars's attempt to form their own colonies. It would have been from this point on Federation or United Earth Federation colonies. And so we come to an end of episode 9 of my Star Trek, the original series timeline, in this case covering the exploration and colonisation of the Solar System. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.